Six Flags Mexico, located in Mexico City, is the country's largest theme park, probably the largest theme park on this side of the world south of the United States. They're home to 9 roller coasters, 110 acres of land, like 50 attractions. It was one that was high on my bucket list for a while. I was thrilled that I got to make it down to visit earlier this year. And while the park had a lot of great things going for it, unfortunately, I walked away wishing I enjoyed my experience more than I actually did. Because on paper, this park looks great. They have 2 big signature roller coasters with Superman and Medusa, some really pretty scenic areas, but when you look past that and focus on how the park is being run, there are some serious problems that we gotta talk about. This is mainly in the form of loose articles, operations, and ride closures. I'm going to go in detail with these 3 areas later in the video, talking about our experiences as well as what would make them better, because if I'm being frank here, if they made a couple small changes to those areas, this park would be a much better enjoyable experience for your average guest. But let's talk about the good first, starting with some of the basics. So Six Flags Mexico is located on the south side of Mexico City in a really hilly area. So this is a terrain park. Be prepared to do some walking. It's actually pretty interesting where this park is set up because it's right at this like major intersection where there's just like a bunch of businesses and then just randomly the entrance to a theme park. We actually stayed at a nearby hotel that we just walked straight into the park. There are 2 entrances here. The second gate is over by Justice League. It's actually only open when the park is a bit busier, so like during the summer. So it was not open for us. We just went through the main entrance. And right when you walk in, you're greeted with a very pretty entrance area. There's some classic Spanish theming, some really old school looking buildings. The first ride you see is actually a set of teacups. You'll take a left-hand turn past a restaurant. There's some cool buildings, some basic stuff like locker areas. And the first roller coaster you get to is Superman, which is interesting because that physical ride is actually all the way on the other side of the park, but the thing is so huge that they put the station right up front. And I actually have a full review of Superman as well as Medusa Steel Coaster already on this channel. So if you want to learn more about those specific attractions, I recommend you go watch those videos because I'm not really going to discuss those ride experiences here. But in walking around Six Flags Mexico, one thing that I noticed is that these themed areas actually had theming, like more so than your typical Six Flags themed area. This was on like a Fiesta Texas level if you've been to that park. Think about how those different areas looked. Mexico was right up there. There's of course the DC themed area, 2 actually, there's one for the kids. There's this very 50s themed area, that's definitely a bit more on the loose side. There's an old Western style area, that's where Medusa is. And so there's definitely some nice visuals on a lot of these pathways. And that goes for a lot of the rides too. They've tried to fit in each attraction to blend with the area. Like this ride right here. Guests are literally riding in a pineapple while there's a big giant pineapple in the center wearing sunglasses. And where is it? The Polynesian section. And that's also the same area that has a Johnny Rockets that sure enough has some Polynesian inspiration to it. Also featuring a giant hamburger out front. And it's weird statues like these that you'll find all around the park. So in that way, there's a bit of a mishmash depending on where you're walking around. Some things that you'll see are seemingly random. It's not as bad as some parks, but there's definitely not a ton of consistency. Like for instance, there's a Leonardo da Vinci museum right next to Zombie Hunter and a giant gorilla. And because it's Six Flags, of course, they're going to have advertisements everywhere. And they get pretty creative and interesting with some of these ads, mainly in the form of giant things, like a big cookie, a massive thing of bug spray. It's very random. And, you know, it's fun. There's a bunch of these scattered around the park, but it definitely ties in with this idea that there's just a little bit of everything everywhere. Like, I'm pretty sure at one point we heard Christmas music playing, and we did not go during Christmas time. So I'm not sure what that was all about. But some areas are definitely prettier than others. I think my favorite section to walk around was this Polynesian kind of Hawaiian themed area over by their drop tower. I loved all the tiki inspired statues and everything. There's a family coaster over there. It goes through some rock work. It has very low clearances, so mind your hands. And it was just a total surprise. I didn't expect to see something like that here. But I also really did love the front entrance area. It's a perfect introductory path to the park. I just wish that we saw a little bit more theming like that in some of those back areas, but that's okay. Overall, though, you can tell that they're just really taking good care of this park. It was clean, it was tidy, which I don't know if I could say that about a lot of other Six Flags parks. So in that way, I was pretty impressed. Another thing I was impressed with, I was wondering going into this what the food situation would look like. Would it be a lot of local offerings, or would it be kind of more basic Six Flags theme park food? And the answer is it's actually a bit of both. So you do have some options. We had some authentic food at this restaurant that was right up front, and it was really good. You would never guess that it was food from a Six Flags park. But then you can also go get a burger that, doesn't taste that great. I would say most of the time it's typical like American, pizza, hot dogs, that sort of thing. But I did appreciate that they sprinkled in some kind of traditional Mexican style cuisine if you want that option. But do be aware, the dining plan here is kind of a pain. I would say most things aren't fully covered by it, and a lot of things are just blatantly not included. But the good news is that if you're visiting from the US, the exchange rate down here is fantastic. I mean, if you bought a water bottle, it's like just over $1. It's really affordable, which really comes in handy if you want to get skip the lines, which at this park, you'll probably need them because operations are a pain. Let's jump into our first big problem with Six Flags Mexico. And there's kind of varying degrees of this one. The first big issue is the wait times. Now, you go to a place like Universal or Disney, the wait times often are pretty accurate, but they overestimate. So if you end up waiting a shorter amount of time, you walk away pleasantly surprised. You're like, wow, I got in a 90-minute line and it only took an hour. That's great. At Six Flags Mexico, it is the opposite approach. They underestimate everything. So you will wait longer than the advertised time for every single attraction. We got in line for Superman. It was listed a 25-minute wait, so we got a locker to put our loose items in. And I'm going to talk about loose items here later. But the locker was good for an hour. And sure enough, Superman ended up taking well over that time. So we had to pay for a locker extension when from the beginning, we would have just selected 2 hours if we had known it was going to take that long. Part of the big problem here is because they've run one train on everything, when they definitely could be running two. I've been told that they typically run one train on everything from January through April, which was in the time frame of when we went. So if you aren't going during that range, this might not be an issue. They say it's because you won't need two trains because the park won't be busy. But that's the thing, is the park was busy. You had an hour line for everything, but that's not busy to Six Flags Mexico. So one train. And it's not because they're doing maintenance on another train. For Superman, they have 3 trains. So if you're using one train for parts, that other train is just sitting there doing nothing. And on a long ride like Superman, I'm sorry, but there's no excuse for why you should be running one train on it, especially when you have an hour line. So I definitely recommend the Flash Pass. This will make your experience a lot easier. You can get 3 skip the lines for like $7 or 10 skip the lines for $20. And when there's one train on everything, there's no reason not to do this. Now, also be warned, if you're a coaster enthusiast, I know on rides like Medusa or Superman, you'll probably want to get some airtime. They staple here pretty hard, and it's on every attraction. So just be aware. There's also a very strict no re-ride policy. Now, you might not need this when everything has a really long line, but at one point at the end of the night, we were trying to get 2 rides in on Medusa because there was no one there, and they will not allow you to stay in your seat even if there's no one there. Now, I have seen other parks do this, but it seems like Six Flags Mexico takes it to the extreme. Some friends of ours tried to re-ride when a row was empty, and the ride ops hit the all clear, started to dispatch the train, and then recognized them from being on the previous train, stopped the ride, and then kicked them off. I'm sorry, but what? I have never heard of any other park doing something like that. That is insane. And the last big issue we had with this park operationally was, again, back at Medusa at the end of the night when there was no one there. Not only could you not re-ride if there was an empty seat, but they insisted upon loading the train front to back to the point where we got put in the middle for our last ride of the night, even though the back row was open, and they wouldn't make any exceptions. Like, I remember them doing that sort of thing in Japan and thought it was weird there, but it definitely didn't make any sense here. It was like they were being strict for the sake of being strict, which also brings us to number 2, loose articles. As you can imagine, they are also very strict about this. But it's like they purposefully made it difficult because I have no problem if you're going to be strict. Hey, no loose articles, metal detectors, whatever, that's fine. I'm used to seeing that with like Hulk or Velocicoaster. But they make it easy for you with free lockers, or at some other parks that have that, they'll even have like a drink holder or little cubbies on the platform for like your phone. A lot of SeaWorld parks do that. They don't have any of that here. No backpacks, no cameras, no food in the queue. So no, you can't eat in line. No drink cups. There's a greeter out front specifically making sure you don't bring any of that in line. They don't care if you bring your phone with you in line. It's just got to stay in a pocket. But they don't care if it's unsecured. On Medusa, they would rather you hold your phone in your hand on the ride than set it off to the side on the platform. That's why those little cubbies off to the side are so important. And every once in a while, you get to an attraction that has something like that, but you can't use them. Like Sarah at one point tried to put her phone in the Joker cubbies, and they said she had to ride with it, holding it in her hand, or put it in an unsecured pocket where it could potentially fly out, instead of leaving it in a slot that was labeled for loose articles. It didn't make any sense. Like, if you're gonna have the very strict no loose articles policy, that's fine, but don't have cubbies on the ride platform if your guests aren't allowed to use them. It's just gonna confuse everyone. I also thought it was strange some of the rides that were super strict with loose articles. Like Justice League is a fairly slow moving dark ride. You could easily put your bag at your feet. No, you gotta get a locker for that one. Same with the Ferris wheel, weirdly enough. Yeah, you have a camera that you wanna get some pictures from the top? No, not allowed. So as you can imagine, you're gonna need a locker for almost every big attraction in this park. Unfortunately though, though, lockers are a pain here. This was another big issue, with the first problem being they're hard to find. They're very sporadically placed, and then once you get to them, they don't accept card. You're gonna need cash. So you're gonna have to go find an ATM. Luckily, there is one right by Superman's exit at the gift shop. And once you have that money, be aware once you go to the locker locations, they do not give change. So I hope you have the exact amount. And then finally, those lockers do not have a movable system in place. You have to pay for each individual one. Everything that they have in place with this system leads to a more and more frustrating experience. And it really makes you appreciate parks that have it streamlined. More and more parks are starting to realize that there's an easier way to do this, and I really hope that Six Flags Mexico joins them at some point. And that brings me to my final big problem I had with Six Flags Mexico, and that is with the ride closures. Specifically when the park closes for the day, and then when the rides close for the day. Because everything is very inconsistent. Let's say the park was supposed to close at 10. Superman was closed by 9, and then Medusa closed 15 minutes before 10, and there's no one there telling you when the line will close. They don't have a sign up saying, hey, this line will close early, and they don't tell all of the employees. We were told completely different things depending on which employee we asked. Now you're probably thinking, all right, they're probably just closing the line based off of the wait time. So like if it's an hour line, yeah, they close an hour early. It was completely random. We couldn't figure it out at all. My best guess for why they did it is because the park was set to close at 10. The employees were to be done working at 10. That means they want to have all of the riders off well before that so they can do anything necessary, clean up, whatever, so that they're walking out the door at 10 o'clock. Okay, that's great and all for your employees, but that is such a crappy thing to do for your guests because here's what happens. You have all these rides closing at completely different times. There are guests all over the park basically running around just trying to find something that is open and to keep getting turned away because there's nowhere to find out what is open and what isn't. At the end of the night, our second day, we wanted to ride Medusa, so we asked the employee, hey, what time does this line close? They said 30 minutes early. So we're like, okay, so we still have time. Let's go hop on Superman, and then we'll come back and we'll still make it before the line closes at Medusa. So we went to go do Superman, which the employee said was open. We get there, it's closed. So we go back to Medusa to ride that. Well, now that ride is closed. It closed way earlier than they physically told us. This happened both nights we were there with completely different attractions. In my opinion, it sounds like a communication issue. Like all the employees are on a completely different page as to when the attraction is going to close, so they're all telling everyone completely different times. There's just got to be a better way. In my opinion, here's what you should do instead. Instead of closing the park at 10 and closing all of your rides early, close the park at 9 and leave your lines open. So as soon as it hits 9 o'clock, we're not accepting any more guests in. That's what most parks do, and it's proven to work very well. And that way, all of your employees would be out of there by 10. That to me is a lot better than playing this guessing game of what is going to be open and just getting horribly unlucky. Like at one point this was so bad that we got in line for Dark Knight. When the greeter up front said it was open, we were partway through the line and then the employees decided to close the attraction because they were done for the night and made everyone leave. So we all got kicked out of line without riding. Who does that? And no, it wasn't because something was wrong with the ride. They're just like, oh, all right, that's it, guys. Like, why would you let people still get in line if you're gonna do that? It's just horribly unprofessional. And if after hearing all this, you're thinking, man, these guys just really had a bad day. I'm sure the park isn't like that all the time. We were there 2 days. Both days it was like this at every single attraction that we saw. And I know another thing some of you guys are gonna say is, well, it's probably just a language barrier. I was with Sarah both days and she speaks fluent Spanish. So no, we are reading and hearing everything pretty accurately. Plus, we've also heard very similar stories from other people who have visited this park. On paper, this should be one of the best Six Flags parks. It has so much going for it, but I just fundamentally disagree with the way it's being run because of how much it negatively impacts your experience there. But if they made some simple changes to those 3 fundamental issues, I think we would have been walking away telling everyone, you gotta go visit Six Flags Mexico. You'll have an awesome time. Instead, I'm not sure I would recommend people visit this park, and I'm not sure I would go back. Like maybe one day, maybe if they have some management changes, or decide to fix things. But it's just so sad when you have all these really cool looking rides, a park that is really pretty and well taken care of, but every time you get to an attraction, there's some crazy policy or something that just really takes away from the fun of it. Like at that point, how do you have a fun, carefree day? Aren't amusement parks supposed to be stress-free? Instead, I left Six Flags Mexico more stressed than when I walked in. And in my opinion, that's just really sad because the potential here is through the roof. But I guess those are just my thoughts on Six Flags Mexico, located in Mexico City. If you've been here, I would love to hear your experience. If you encountered some of the same issues that I brought up, or if you had a completely different experience, please share down below. And of course, make sure to stay tuned for more park reviews here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.